Hey there. Welcome to our channel Sleeping Pill, where stories drift softly into the night. I'm Michael, your companion on this slow journey into sleep. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let this gentle story carry you toward sleep. Tonight we are trading in the warm, humid crush of the familiar for something that looks perfect on a postcard but feels exactly like forgetting your wallet at home. The utterly, beautifully disappointing Swiss Alps honeymoon. Picture this. You are standing on a platform in Lugano, Switzerland. It's mid-July, but this isn't the crisp, clean mountain air you were promised. It is a thick, viscous heat that seems to cling to the skin, making your silk shirt feel like cling film. The sun beats down on the pastel-colored buildings, reflecting off the impossibly turquoise lake. You wipe your forehead with the back of your hand, realizing you've already sweated through your carefully ironed linen trousers. This was supposed to be the ethereal, soft, focused start to your marriage, the moment the glamour of the planning finally paid off. Instead, you feel vaguely sticky, and your new spouse, who insisted on wearing that heavy wool blend travel suit because it looks more European, is currently searching for sunglasses inside a closed kiosk. You check your phone for the weather forecast you ignored in favor of romantic spontaneity, and the screen mocks you with a relentless 30 Celsius reading. You remember the travel agent promising alpine breezes, which, judging by the current atmospheric conditions, must be currently blowing fiercely over a completely different continent. You lean against a marble pillar, trying to look sophisticated while discreetly fanning yourself with the itinerary booklet. This city, Lugano, was just the entry point, the warm-up act before the real ascent, but right now, the glamour is already melting, drip by slow drip. You look over at your partner, who has finally located their sunglasses and is now squinting intensely at a small bronze statue of a local dog, looking vaguely annoyed that the dog isn't moving. You realize with a slow dawning sense of dread that only comes from spending 3 months' salary on a trip you haven't even started, that this entire trip might hinge on an over-optimistic booking. You probably won't survive this amount of unchecked expectation meeting this much humidity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. It helps me feel connected across the miles. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You finally gather your bearings, tug your partner away from the statue, and steer toward the train station, hoping the promise of altitude will finally deliver the promised magic. The train journey itself was supposed to be the transition, the cinematic moment where the sticky Mediterranean warmth gave way to crisp alpine air. But even that was a negotiation with reality. You board the regional express from Lugano, heading north, dragging your overstuffed, suspiciously heavy luggage behind you. You find your reserved compartment, and it is, predictably, a study in cramped angles. You manage to wedge your suitcase under the seat meant for feet, narrowly avoiding kicking your partner, who is already trying to wedge themselves into the window seat. The ticket promised scenic vistas. Instead, for the first hour, You are treated to the backside of industrial warehouses and the occasional glimpse of a bored-looking cow staring blankly through a chain-link fence. It wasn't exactly the prelude to mountain majesty. You recall the brochure photo, sunlight dappling through pine needles onto an immaculate carriage interior. The reality involves peeling vinyl seats and a distinct, faint odor that you tentatively categorize as old cheese mixed with radiator leak. You pull out the travel guide, flipping past the chapter titled Romantic Picnics Above the Clouds, and landing squarely on Understanding Swiss Public Transit Etiquette. You try to engage your spouse, attempting to inject enthusiasm where none is currently generated. "Isn't this exciting?" you ask, gesturing vaguely at a passing tunnel entrance. They respond with a grunt that could mean anything from agreement to deep existential boredom. You notice they are already asleep, head tilted at an alarming angle against the narrow glass, having wisely conserved their energy. This leaves you alone with the slow, rhythmic clatter of the wheels and the gradual, almost imperceptible climb. Slowly, things begin to change. The flat, sunny valleys start to wrinkle into foothills. The green deepens, and suddenly, the air quality inside the carriage seems to improve. Maybe because a window a few rows up was cracked open by a kind commuter. You press your face against the glass, feeling the slight chill seep through the pane. The concrete gives way to stone. The houses become smaller, steeper, and their roofs suddenly seem too heavy for their walls, built to withstand something serious. You are finally gaining elevation. You watch as the lush foliage thins, replaced by darker, denser pine forests that look like deep green felt draped over sharp rock. You nudge your partner awake, perhaps a little too forcefully. "Look, we're going up," you whisper excitedly. They blink, disoriented, look out, see a massive gray cliff face rushing by inches from the window, and immediately ask if you remember to pack the emergency headache tablets. You laugh, a slightly too loud, nervous sound in the quiet carriage, thinking, "Of course, the one thing I remembered was the brochure that promised everything but delivered only altitude." You realize you have packed 3 entirely inappropriate summer outfits for every one practical wool layer. That's going to be fun later. The final arrival at the chalet felt less like a triumphant culmination of your ascent and more like being dropped off at the edge of the world's quietest bus stop. You finally disembark at the tiny, unmanned station marked with a sign whose paint was peeling faster than the veneer on your carry-on luggage. The pre-booked transfer, a small, boxy, and slightly alarming-looking local van, was waiting, its driver looking equally underwhelmed by your arrival. He gestures toward the van, and you realize there's barely enough room for the two of you, let alone your absurd quantity of luggage, which, remember, includes 3 summer dresses for every one thermal layer. You manage to stuff everything into the back, watching with mild horror as a leather suitcase edge crimps ominously under the weight of your waterproof hiking boots. Boots you suspect you won't wear unless the entire mountain range spontaneously decided to turn into a slippery mud pit. The drive up to the Chalet Edelweiss, a name that suggested rustic grandeur but currently suggested slightly mildewed attic, was steep, narrow, and terrifyingly beautiful. Every turn revealed a vista so aggressively picturesque that it almost felt insulting, knowing how little faith you currently had in the accommodations awaiting you. You arrive at the chalet, a dark wood structure clinging improbably to the mountainside. The air here finally is cold, a genuine, teeth-chattering cold that makes you instantly regret leaving your emergency tablets in the warm pocket of your checked luggage. You meet the proprietor, a man whose expression suggested he'd seen 1,000 honeymooners exactly like you. Shiny, optimistic, and utterly unprepared for the sheer, unvarnished reality of alpine winter tourism in July. He hands you the key. It's an enormous, old-fashioned brass thing, heavy and cold. In your palm, the kind that looks like it should unlock a dungeon, not a cozy love nest. He points vaguely down a hallway, smelling intensely of aged wood polish and something vaguely fungal, indicating your room is number 3. You haul your bags up one flight of creaky, dimly lit stairs, and you finally push open the door to room 3, the magic. That delicate fictional magic you'd been clinging to since leaving Mumbai finally evaporates completely. The room is not grand, it is small. The bed dominates the space, a stiff-looking double that seems determined to keep you on its very edges. You drop your bag by the door, and the sound it makes hitting the floor is muffled, deadened by a thick, beige carpet that looks like it hasn't been properly cleaned since the last time this chalet hosted a honeymoon in 1988. Worse, the chill that greeted you outside has morphed inside into a persistent dampness. It's not just cold, it's the deep, bone-chilling cold that comes from stone walls that have been perpetually shaded. You tentatively touch the duvet cover. It feels heavy, clammy, and utterly resistant to warmth. Your spouse, meanwhile, has done a quick inventory of the amenities. They point to a very small television bolted high in the corner displaying only static, and then to a single, slightly tarnished kettle resting on a tray with 2 tiny generic tea bags. "Well," your spouse says, their voice echoing slightly in the small space, "at least we have tea." You can't help but picture the dog statue from the train station, offering a slow, knowing nod from miles away. You realize this isn't just a room, it's a perfectly preserved time capsule of low-grade disappointment. You try to joke. "At least if we get snowed in, we can eat the carpet fibers for fiber." Your spouse doesn't laugh. They are too busy trying to turn the radiator knob, which appears to be fused permanently into the off position. The honeymoon, as you already suspected, was a masterclass in irony, and nothing cemented this more than the great first snowfall incident. You wake up on the second morning, stiff and slightly cold, despite having piled every available blanket, curtain, and throw pillow onto the bed. The room is enveloped in a strange, silvery light. You roll over, careful not to disturb your partner, whose knees are already bumping yours due to the narrow mattress width. You peek out the small, condensation-streaked window and gasp. It's snowing. Not a delicate dusting, but large, heavy, silent flakes are tumbling down, already coating the steep roofs and the surrounding pine trees in an immaculate white blanket. Finally, you think, the Alps. Delivering on their promise, this is the moment for cozy intimacy, hot cocoa, and perhaps a shared laugh about the damp smell in the room. This is the postcard. Your spouse wakes up, sees the scene, and for a fleeting, beautiful moment, the disappointment in their eyes is replaced by genuine wonder. They suggest, with an enthusiasm previously reserved for checking stock market updates, that you should immediately go out and experience the fresh powder. You agree, rushing to find the specific waterproof jackets you bought 6 months ago. specifically for this purpose, during a frenzy of pre-honeymoon shopping at a mall sale. You pull on your layers, feeling warm and a little bulky. You step out onto the small, snow-covered balcony. The air hits you. It's sharp, clean, and smells deliciously of pine and wet earth. You reach out a hand to catch a flake, and your spouse steps up behind you, ready for the perfect, spontaneous moment. "We need a picture," they declare, pulling out the phone. You smile, lean back, and as your spouse begins to frame the shot against the backdrop of the falling snow, you hear a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible zzz. It is the faint, defeated sound of a zipper giving up its post, specifically the zipper on your brand new, bright red, supposedly weather-resistant alpine jacket. It had been holding the front of your coat together against the elements, and now it is completely separated from the teeth, flapping uselessly open right down the middle. The cold air immediately rushes in, targeting your midsection like a guided missile. You freeze, your smile immediately transforming into a strained grimace. Your partner, engrossed in finding the correct filter for ethereal snow magic, doesn't notice. "Hold that pose, babe, just a little wider," they instruct. Meanwhile, you are desperately trying to pinch the fabric together, realizing the zipper pull has vanished entirely into the void of the jacket's inner lining. The supposedly romantic snowfall has now become an active adversary, coating your suddenly exposed shirt in a fine layer of chilling dampness. You try to fix it, fiddling with the broken metal teeth, only to realize the zipper is not just broken, but fundamentally flawed. A manufacturing error on an item you specifically overpaid for. You remember the sales assistant assuring you, "This zipper can withstand hurricane force winds." A statement that now seems hysterically optimistic given its defeat by a few snowflakes. "What's wrong?" your spouse finally asks, noticing the strange contortion of your arms. "It's the zipper," you mutter, teeth starting to chatter slightly. "It broke." It's totally ruined. The beautiful moment shatters like an icicle dropped onto pavement. The romance drains away, replaced by the mundane annoyance of poorly manufactured synthetic fibers. You retreat inside, defeated by one small mechanical failure. Your spouse sighs, not in anger, but in the resigned disappointment that only comes from realizing that even the perfect snowy vista can't fix a shoddy garment. You spend the next 10 minutes trying to pin the two sides of the jacket together with a safety pin salvaged from a forgotten toiletry bag, confirming that truly boring love stories are made not of grand tragedies, but of malfunctioning domestic objects. After the zipper incident, the idea of embracing the great outdoors felt less like romance and more like an invitation for further equipment failure, so you retreated indoors. This marked the beginning of the indoor days, where the sheer, unadulterated majesty of the Swiss Alps became something you only viewed through small, perpetually fogged windows. You spent the next day attempting to make your tiny room number 3 with its beige carpet that swallowed light, feel like a cozy sanctuary instead of a glorified storage closet. Your spouse, convinced that the dampness was psychological, spent a good hour meticulously shaking out the heavy, clammy duvet, which only seemed to redistribute the cold more evenly throughout the fabric. The radiator remained a steadfast, cold column of metal, clearly offended by the notion of actually generating heat in July. You tried the kettle. It worked, sputtering out lukewarm water that barely steamed, which was perhaps the perfect beverage for this environment. The main entertainment source quickly became the small, antiquated television bolted high on the wall. You flip through the channels, mostly German and Italian public broadcasting, offering stern-looking anchors discussing fiscal policy or very long films about farmers, until you find one channel that seems to be showing something. It flickers, cuts out, and then locks into a fuzzy loop of a looping montage of local scenic shots set to strangely frantic accordion music. You both watch it twice just to be sure you hadn't imagined the intensity of the accordion. Then came the real test of marital endurance: the internet. You remembered that the Wi-Fi password was scrawled on a tiny slip of paper given to you by the proprietor, the one who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. You managed to connect one device, maybe two, if you hold your breath and stand perfectly still near the door. The connection speed, however, was best described as dial-up speed measured in geological epochs. You spent a solid 45 minutes attempting to download a single low-resolution photo, only for the connection to drop during the final percentage point. You realized, with a wry sense of humor that only true shared suffering can foster, that the real honeymoon activity here was going to be staring at the ceiling while listening to the constant, faint drip from the bathroom tap. You try to joke about it. You know, darling, this slow connection is actually great for us. It forces us to communicate face to face like pioneers. Your spouse merely replied, pioneers didn't have to share a single charging port between a phone and a tablet, and then promptly started reading the instruction manual for the thermostat, a manual that you suspect was written in Sanskrit. You resort to telling each other stories, trying to recall the most dramatic moments of your lives, desperately trying to find a topic more interesting than the structural integrity of the wall opposite the bed. You even tried watching that looping accordion video a third time, hoping the music would evolve into something new. It didn't. It just kept playing, a testament to how quickly romance can be suffocated by bad bandwidth and persistent dampness. The previous day's cozy confinement was shattered by your spouse's sudden, inexplicable desire to try skiing, leading directly to the ski lesson fiasco. You're in the Alps, after all. Staring at the beige carpet can only sustain a marriage for so long. You drive down to the nearest slope, a gentle-looking bunny hill that appears deceptively friendly, like a plush toy with sharp teeth. You rent the gear, which involves wrestling your feet into hard plastic boots that seem designed by medieval torturers. The boots pinch, the skis feel impossibly long, and the pole straps feel suspiciously like the zippers from your failed alpine jacket purchase. Your spouse, however, looks unnaturally graceful in their rented neon yellow gear, radiating an irritating can-do enthusiasm. You meet the instructor, a man named Hans, who is impossibly cheerful, possesses a terrifyingly white smile, and speaks with the rapid-fire intensity of someone who has successfully converted existential dread into positive energy. Hans is very excited for you to learn the pizza and French fry techniques, the beginner's wedge and parallel skiing for the uninitiated. You, however, feel like a newborn deer trying to walk on greased linoleum. The first few minutes are spent simply trying to stand up without immediately falling over sideways. Hans demonstrates the snowplow technique, knees together, tips forming a triangle, and sets you off on the gentlest slope. You are instructed to slide slightly, control your speed, and stop on command. Simple, right? The moment you start sliding, however, your brain decides that the only safe response to any form of speed is panic. You forget the pizza, the French fry, and the name of your own spouse. You start gathering momentum far faster than you intended. Ahead of you, Hans is coaching your partner, who is already executing near-perfect turns, looking disgustingly natural. And then there's a loud, high-pitched laugh. It comes from a small child, maybe 5 years old, who is effortlessly zipping past you, a tiny blur of brightly colored snowsuit, followed by their grandmother, who gives you a look of profound disappointment. To avoid hitting this remarkably proficient toddler, you instinctively pivot, not with the smooth, graceful motion Hans taught you, but with the full, uncoordinated force of someone falling off a ladder. You manage to steer yourself directly into a large, soft snowbank, which thankfully stops your momentum. Unfortunately, the violence of the stop causes your right ski to snap off with a loud thwack, sending your lower leg into an extremely unnatural torque-induced twist. The pain isn't sharp. It's a slow, dull, spreading ache that signifies something is definitely mechanically wrong. Hans, whose smile had been fixed in place, finally lets it drop, revealing a look of genuine concern. He rushes over and your partner rushes over, forgetting their perfect French fries. You are lying there, half buried in cold snow, with one ski pole stuck in your helmet, looking like a discarded action figure. You manage a groan. "I think I pulled something. I wanted to avoid the child," you wheeze, a valiant attempt at self-justification. Hans kneels down, his breath fogging in the cold air, and assesses the situation. He determines that you have achieved a truly boring, moderately severe ligament sprain, a full-body failure to ski. You spend the next 2 hours in a tiny, cheerful first aid post, having your ankle wrapped by a very kind but utterly unimpressed nurse. The only souvenir you brought back from the slopes was an elastic bandage and the enduring memory of Hans's deeply deflated sigh. You realize you have paid an exorbitant amount for a ski lesson that resulted in 0 skiing, proving once again that the greatest adventures are often the quickest and most painful defeats. You look at your spouse, who is now carrying your discarded ski boots, the picture of resigned marital duty, and you know deep down that the rest of this vacation is now officially going to be conducted at a strictly horizontal level. With your ankle now beautifully immobilized in a compression bandage, the great outdoors was definitively canceled, cementing the rest of your stay as genuinely indoor days. This was forced coziness, elevated to an extreme sport. Confined mostly to room 3, the damp smell seems to have intensified, perhaps in sympathy with your minor medical mishap. The small, stiff bed becomes your command center, and the focus shifts entirely to the small, irritating details of your temporary domestic sphere. You spend a surprising amount of time simply organizing your belongings, dividing the luggage into damp, less damp, and optimistically dry. Your spouse, feeling guilty about their superior skiing ability and your current state of forced immobility, tries their best to be the attentive nurse. This mainly involves fetching lukewarm water from the perpetually underperforming kettle and reading aloud from the travel brochure's list of thrilling activities, which now sound like cruel jokes: paragliding over the valley, guided mountain hikes. Your main mission during this horizontal recovery period is the conquest of the chalet's Wi-Fi. You remember the connection was terrible, but you are determined. The tiny slip of paper from the proprietor is consulted again. The password, scrawled in an almost illegible, pointy hand, is finally deciphered. Edelweiss, 1988. You try it. Failure. You try Edelweiss, 1988. Again, slower. Failure. You realize, with the cold clarity of boredom, that the exclamation point is not an exclamation point, but a tiny misplaced apostrophe, or maybe a smudge of aged jam. After 12 solid minutes of typing variations, you finally crack the code. The password is just Chalet Edelweiss, written entirely in lowercase with 0 punctuation. The name was so obvious, so deeply uninspired. It was the last thing you tried. You feel a brief, intoxicating rush of victory, a triumph of mind over poorly managed hospitality infrastructure. However, the sheer effort required to connect does not guarantee quality. The signal constantly fluctuates between 1 bar, sufficient for loading plain text from 2005, and 0 bars, sufficient for staring at your own reflection in the blank screen. You use the tiny window of bandwidth to check your work email, immediately regretting this decision as a dozen non-urgent notifications flood your screen, reminding you that real life is waiting, probably with better internet access. You try to entertain yourself with a light joke. You know, this internet speed is so slow, I could write a letter, mail it, and get a reply before a YouTube video loads. Your partner barely smiles, too engrossed in trying to coax another drop of hot water from the shower, which, you've discovered, only delivers 2 minutes of lukewarm flow before reverting to glacial meltwater. You start to memorize the pattern of the wood grain on the ceiling, noting a particular knot that looks suspiciously like a grumpy squirrel wearing a tiny pair of skis. You invent an elaborate backstory for the squirrel, its unfulfilled dreams of Olympic glory, its resentment toward Hans, the cheerful ski instructor. You spend a good 45 minutes discussing the squirrel's motivations with your partner, who eventually suggests that maybe you should take another painkiller for your sprain, or possibly for the onset of extreme cabin fever. You realize the true meaning of romantic getaway is simply being trapped together without distractions until you either love each other more or discover every single microscopic annoyance the other possesses. Since being confined to the chalet due to your sprained ankle had already delivered a masterclass in domestic boredom, it was inevitable that the situation would immediately worsen with your partner's sudden illness, turning your shared confinement into a one-sided nursing vigil. This was the moment your spouse developed a full-blown husband's cold. It started, as these things always do, with a tiny, almost imperceptible sniffle that they initially tried to ignore, claiming it was merely the change in the air quality. By midday, however, the sniffle had escalated into a full, throbbing symphony of sneezes, coughs, and dramatic throat clearings. Your partner, a picture of health only days ago while expertly performing French fries on the bunny slope, was now reduced to a demanding, blanket-wrapped creature existing in the permanent half-light of the drawn curtains. Your role instantly shifted from recovering spouse to overworked, unpaid attendant. You, still on a slight limp, and with a perpetually damp jacket that hung accusingly on the coat hook, were now responsible for managing the cabin, which mostly meant fetching and boiling water in the sputtering kettle The primary demand was lukewarm tea constantly. Not hot tea that might scald an already delicate throat, and certainly not cold tea, which was simply unthinkable. It had to be precisely lukewarm, a temperature so specific and fleeting that it required constant monitoring. You spent an hour meticulously testing the temperature with the tip of your pinky finger, aiming for that perfect, barely there heat that seemed to soothe their imaginary ailments. You'd limp the 2 feet from the kettle to the bed, present the tea, and inevitably your partner would take a sip and announce, with the air of a seasoned tea sommelier, that it was slightly too hot on the back of the tongue, or conversely, already quite cold on the way down. You realized with a faint, sleepy sense of resignation that boredom had morphed into light psychological warfare. You tried to make a joke. Honey, the next time you ask for lukewarm tea, I'm just going to give you tap water from the shower. It's already perfectly glacial. They didn't even crack a smile, merely demanding another box of the thin single-ply tissues that seemed to disintegrate the moment they touched a nostril. The tissue consumption alone was astronomical. The waste bin filled up faster than the memory card on your camera, which ironically held only 6 photos of the Lugano dog statue. The lack of quality entertainment continued to haunt you. You considered watching the accordion montage again, but the risk of permanent psychological damage was too high. Instead, you found a local newspaper and spent 20 minutes trying to translate the weather forecast, finally giving up and deciding it probably just said damp, with a chance of low-grade disappointment. You even offered to read the chalet's rules and regulations booklet aloud, hoping the sheer banality would induce natural sleep. But your partner immediately rejected the offer, claiming the light might disturb their fever dreams. You look at the empty tea bags piling up and the tissue mountains growing on the bedside table, and you reflect that this truly is the boring love story. Not the grand, passionate moments of cinematic romance, but the enduring patience required for endless lukewarm tea and the management of a perfectly average cold in an impossibly beautiful yet deeply uncomfortable setting. You finally settle for simply holding your partner's hand, feeling the dry heat of their manufactured fever, and silently counting the number of days until you could check out of the Chalet Edelweiss. After 3 days of near-total seclusion, the oppressive dampness of room 3 and the constant demands for lukewarm tea finally reached a critical mass. You realized a change of scenery was vital, even if your ankle still protested with a dull ache. Your spouse, though dramatically weakened by the common cold, was capable of brief bursts of activity, provided that activity involved soaking in very hot medicated water. This led to the ill-fated expedition to the hot springs. The hotel brochure had described it as a sublime, secluded alpine oasis, promising an experience of pure, restorative thermal bliss. What you actually arrived at after a slightly jarring taxi ride down the winding mountain road was less an oasis and more a crowded public swimming pool with slightly sulfurous water. It was indoors, brightly lit with unforgiving fluorescent bulbs and packed to the gills with people, and not the serene, whispering patrons pictured in the brochure. This was a loud, chattering crowd of various nationalities, all trying to occupy the same 4 square meters of bubbling water. You and your spouse gingerly enter the main pool. The water is admittedly wonderfully hot, providing a brief, glorious relief to your aching ligament and their feverish sinuses. But the sublime nature of the experience quickly degrades. The secluded part of the oasis meant that everyone was essentially floating in a large, communal soup. You spend the first 10 minutes trying to navigate the floating archipelago of human bodies, constantly making awkward eye contact with strangers as you drift toward them. The most challenging aspect was the seating. The pool featured a few small, coveted underwater benches near the jets. You managed to snag one of these spots, and for a moment, you close your eyes and lean back, ready for the restorative bliss. Then an older gentleman, built like a retired Olympic swimmer and seemingly determined to occupy the entire bench, slides in beside you, his elbow immediately digging into your side. Your spouse, meanwhile, has found a slightly better, though still cramped, spot on the other side of the pool, where they are engaged in a silent, passive-aggressive seating war with a woman who is wearing an aggressively floral swim cap. The romantic dip instantly devolves into a desperate, awkward public seating test. You try to maintain your sense of calm, focusing on the therapeutic heat of the water, but the constant proximity of strangers makes it impossible. The older gentleman next to you begins a loud, very detailed conversation on his phone, held precariously above the steaming water, about the price of local cheese wheels. You catch snippets of the conversation, which include the phrase, "I told them 40 francs for Gruyere is theft." You want to laugh at the sheer absurdity, but your spine is currently being compressed by a stranger's shoulder blade. Your spouse finally gives you a frantic look across the pool, a wide-eyed signal that clearly translates to, "Get me out of here. This thermal bliss is making my cold worse." You try to signal back, but you can only manage a small, resigned shrug as the cheese wheel enthusiast leans in to better hear his phone. You realize the true test of your boring love story isn't surviving the Alps. It's surviving this incredibly uncomfortable moment with your dignity intact. You manage to extract yourself from the bench with the finesse of a seal launching itself onto a rock, wave a hasty goodbye to the cheese wheel connoisseur, and signal your spouse. You limp toward the exit, realizing you paid 30 francs for 20 minutes of shared, very public discomfort. You try to joke as you towel off. "Well, remember that time we had an incredibly awkward public seating test in the Alps? That's going in the wedding album." Your partner just sighs, looking profoundly grateful to be back in the cold air, even if it means another 3 days of lukewarm tea. The attempt at rejuvenation at the thermal springs had been an abject failure, but the cold, clear air outside felt wonderfully therapeutic after the chlorinated steam. Still, you had failed to capture a single genuinely beautiful photograph that wasn't ruined by either a broken zipper or a man discussing cheese tariffs. You were determined to correct this. This led to the next stage of your organized disappointment, the map incident. Your spouse, feeling slightly better but now battling the sheer boredom of their confined life, suggested a brief, low-impact hike to a famous vista point, marked clearly on the paper tourist map you'd purchased, a slightly battered, oversized piece of paper that looked like it had been through a car wash. The map promised a stunning, easily accessible view of the valley, just a short walk from the chalet. You agree, grabbing your walking stick, which you are using less for stability and more for dramatic flair, and leaving the damp confines of room 3. The initial walk is genuinely lovely. The air is crisp, the sky is an improbable shade of blue, and the pine trees smell heavenly. You are actually speaking to each other in full sentences, discussing things other than the optimal temperature for tea. The path is clearly marked, and you stroll along feeling a brief, intoxicating return to honeymoon optimism. You even manage a small, genuine laugh when you remember the man discussing Gruyere in the hot springs, a minor shared trauma that now serves as a bonding memory. The map, however, soon enters the chat. You reach a point where the trail seems to split into 3 separate, equally faint dirt paths, none of which correspond perfectly to the neat, dotted line on your paper guide. Your spouse takes charge of the navigation, meticulously rotating the map to align with the mountain range. This is where the gentle sarcasm of a bored spouse meets the aggressive confidence of a spouse holding a map. Okay, the key is the river. See how the line bends here? Your partner says, pointing with conviction to a small, nearly invisible blue line. You, looking at the map, notice that the line they are pointing to is actually a crease in the paper that perfectly bisects a tiny coffee stain. Darling, you venture gently, I think that's just where the map folds. The river seems to be miles to the left. A small, frosty silence descends. Nonsense, they reply with an irritating confidence that only comes from deep-seated confusion. The vista point is due northwest. This path clearly leads northwest. They point to the right-hand path, a narrow, ascending track that looks less like a tourist trail and more like a path made by goats. Against your better judgment, a small, cautious voice in your head reminds you that this is how all boring love stories turn into accidental survival narratives. You concede. You don't want to start an argument over a dotted line and a potential coffee stain. You follow the narrow path, which immediately begins to ascend steeply. The ground becomes rockier, the vegetation denser, and your sprained ankle starts sending polite, then insistent messages of profound regret. After 20 minutes of difficult climbing, during which you pause to pant and wipe sweat off your brow, a distinct and unwelcome echo of your sticky start in Lugano, you reach a clearing. You expect a stunning vista. Instead, you find a small, extremely sturdy wooden fence behind which is a tiny, very ordinary-looking shed with a sign that reads, "Simply private." You have successfully taken a wrong turn trying to find a famous vista point and ended up at a shed. The disappointment is palpable, thick in the cold air. Your partner looks at the shed, then at the map, then back at the shed, desperately trying to integrate this wooden structure into the grand vision of the vista point. Well, they say finally, their voice deflated, it's very private. You can't even summon the energy for a sarcastic retort. You just lean heavily on your stick, realizing the shed is a perfect metaphor for the trip. Overpromised, hard to reach, and ultimately deeply uninteresting. You spend the next 40 minutes carefully descending the goat path, focusing only on not twisting your ankle again, knowing you've now lost an hour of your already limited vacation time to a map error that was essentially a coffee stain. Defeated by the goat path and the incredibly private shed, and with the dampness of the chalet seeming to seep into your very souls, you needed a distraction that required zero physical exertion and, crucially, No map reading. You return to the refuge of room 3 and your spouse, still nursing the remnants of their dramatically inconvenient cold, suggests a new, quiet activity. They pull out a small paperback novel they found abandoned under the miniature bedside table, the kind of book with a sun-bleached spine and slightly yellowed pages, clearly left behind by a previous, equally disappointed guest. The title is something utterly generic, like The Alpine Echo or Heartbreak in the Highlands. You realize it's a romance novel from the 1970s, featuring a brooding man on the cover wearing a knitted vest and staring intensely at a distant, misty peak. The idea is simple, perhaps even charming. You will read the book aloud to each other. This is the definition of quiet, cozy intimacy, a moment lifted straight from an old movie. You begin the first chapter, setting the scene with a heroic description of the Swiss landscape that is hilariously at odds with the current view of your soggy boots and the squirrel-shaped knot on the ceiling. You read for 20 minutes, then hand the book over to your spouse. They take over, adopting a slightly dramatic, throaty voice due to their residual cough, which lends the narrative a surprisingly compelling, tragic dimension. This continues for several hours over the next 2 days. You are engaging in a shared book ritual, reading the same dog-eared novel aloud until you both slowly, irrevocably begin to hate it. The plot, initially quaint, quickly descends into a labyrinth of cliched misunderstandings and overwrought emotional declarations. The heroine constantly suffers from a terrible melancholy, and the brooding hero spends chapters upon chapters failing to communicate a single important thought. The dialogue is so stilted and purple that you have to pause every few pages to suppress a shared snort of laughter. You find yourself dreading the transition. When your spouse hands the book over, you know you are about to encounter another ridiculously florid description of a character's eyes like distant glacial pools, or a sudden, shocking mention of someone fainting dramatically over a spilled cup of coffee. The boredom is transmuted into a specific, shared literary torture. You reach a point where you both know exactly what the other character's going to say before they say it. One evening during a particularly excruciating passage where the hero debates the merits of wearing a cape, you can't take it anymore. You stop mid-sentence. "Wait," you say, lowering the book. Did he seriously just say he grappled with the velvet cruelty of his despair because he forgot his hat? Your spouse closes their eyes and sighs, a deep, world-weary sound. Yes, and I know for a fact that in the next chapter, she will decide that her only course of action is to go feed the local pigeons in a snowstorm. I think we've gone too far, you conclude. We have achieved total literary saturation. I now officially hate this book, and possibly by association, all books with brooding men in knitwear on the cover. The book is closed with a decisive thump. It's a moment of shared, mutually agreed upon failure. You look at each other, not with annoyance, but with the quiet, affectionate resignation of two people who have just survived a joint reading assignment that lasted 2 days too long. You realize that a boring love story isn't about shared passion. It's about shared, gentle ridicule of a poorly written 1970s Alpine romance novel. You place the book on the small table, where another unfortunate guest will eventually find it, and settle back into the silent rhythm of the damp room, slightly relieved to have killed the brooding hero before he could cause any more dramatic, cape-related misery. The enforced proximity, the lukewarm tea, the constant presence of the literary torture device, it was all building toward an inevitable eruption. The marriage had survived the heat of Lugano, the broken zipper, the ski slope near tragedy, and the public bathhouse. What finally broke the dam, predictably, was something monumentally small: the argument over travel adapters. You were attempting to charge your phone one evening, having successfully maintained the fragile Wi-Fi connection for a solid 17 minutes. You reached into the designated electronics pouch. In your carry-on, a small zippered nylon bag, you had carefully packed yourself and found nothing but charging cables and an unused pair of noise-canceling earplugs. No adapter. You sit up on the edge of the uncomfortable bed, the movement sending a fresh twinge up your ankle. "Where's the European adapter?" you ask, keeping your voice deliberately level, a dangerous sign in itself. Your spouse, who is currently scrolling through static on the television, doesn't look up. "It's in the bag, obviously." "No, it's not," you state, holding up the empty pouch. "I checked. It's not here." The silence that follows is immediately hostile. The television static seems to hum louder in response. Your spouse slowly lowers the remote control. This is the moment where two people who have been trying very hard to be polite realize they are too tired, too cooped up, and too underwhelmed by their honeymoon to keep up the charade. "Well, you were responsible for packing the electronics pouch," they say, the accusation hanging in the damp air like a bad smell that even the mountain breeze couldn't carry away. "I packed the hiking socks and the emergency aspirin." "Yes, but I distinctly remember saying, 'Hey, make sure you grab the universal adapter from the drawer.' And you said, 'Got it, already in the pouch.'" You recall the exact moment with perfect clarity. You were outside the apartment building juggling 3 bags while your partner dashed back inside for just one last thing. "I must have put it in your bag by mistake," they counter, avoiding eye contact by focusing intently on the squirrel knot again. "It's your fault for having so many bags anyway." And there it is. The argument isn't about the adapter, it's about the 3 months of planning, the expense, the humidity, the failed zipper, the shed at the end of the goat path, and the constant low-grade feeling that you've paid a fortune to be mildly inconvenienced in a scenic location. The argument escalates quickly, fueled by pent-up vacation frustration rather than genuine malice. You bring up the 3 summer dresses you can't wear. They bring up the fact that you insisted on renting the smallest, least comfortable car in the fleet. You argue about who has the worse sprain. Yours is physical, theirs is entirely dramatic. You even bring up the lukewarm tea. It's not a shouting match, it's something worse. A very quiet, intensely personal exchange of every small logistical failure from the last week. It ends not with a door slam, but with both of you turning away, staring at opposite walls. You at the window, they at the malfunctioning radiator. Both breathing heavily, the tension thick enough to cut with a dull butter knife. You realize you've successfully spent an entire evening being completely unhappy in one of the most beautiful places on earth. The adapter lies forgotten in the bottom of a suitcase you'll likely never unpack before leaving. The adapter argument, bless its petty, petty heart, settled into a low, throbbing silence the kind of quiet that signals a truce born of sheer exhaustion rather than resolution. It was in this quiet, as you both stared at the ceiling, that the crucial revelation surfaced, not with a bang, but with the dull thud of an unread pamphlet hitting the beige carpet. You realize, with sudden, startling clarity, that this entire Swiss trip was never about shared excitement. It was about checking a box. You both subconsciously recognized that the honeymoon was supposed to be a mandatory checkpoint in the timeline of a serious relationship, a required performance before the next level. It wasn't a spontaneous choice, born of shared dreams. It was simply the next item on the established relationship to-do list. You recall the planning phase, the frantic back and forth over destinations, the compromise between your desire for tropical sun and their need for mountain prestige, and finally settling on the Alps because it sounded suitably grand and expensive. You see now that neither of you was truly passionate about snow, high altitudes, or even the concept of this specific trip. You were passionate about appearing to have had the perfect, culturally appropriate honeymoon. The reality, the damp chalet, the broken zipper, the lukewarm tea, the aggressive cheese discussions, was simply the universe stripping away the veneer of expectation. You finally sit up, ignoring the throb in your ankle, and look at your spouse, who mirrors your expression. There is no lingering resentment from the adapter fight, just a shared, tired understanding. We didn't actually want to be here, did we? You say. The words soft, almost too quiet for the room. Your partner lets out a breath that might have been a laugh, a sigh, or a stifled sneeze. No, they admit. We wanted the idea of being here. We wanted the photos for the anniversary card. I just wanted to prove I could handle a cold climate, and you wanted to prove you could pack efficiently. It's an utterly deflating yet profoundly honest admission. You both nod. The entire trip, from the sticky arrival in Lugano to the shed at the top of the goat path, was a successful performance of honeymooners. You've navigated the cliches and the minor disasters with minimal actual yelling. You've survived the experience, which you realize is perhaps a much better predictor of long-term marital success than flawlessly executed romantic gestures. You didn't conquer the Alps, you endured them together, trading anecdotes about failing technology and uncomfortable seating. You think back to the initial excitement and realize how heavy that early optimism was. Now it's lighter, cleared out by the sheer volume of mundane failures. It feels strange, but real. The pressure is off. You're now simply two people sharing a small, damp room who need to figure out how to get home. The moment of blunt honesty, the mutual recognition that the Swiss Alps trip was a check-the-box exercise rather than a romantic odyssey, was strangely liberating. The tension that had been building since the Lugano humidity finally dissipated, leaving behind a strange, flat calm. You spend the final afternoon in a state of almost Zen resignation. The focus shifts entirely to the practicalities of escape. This is the packing up phase, an oddly satisfying activity given the state of your luggage from the departure. You're not packing souvenirs. You're packing evidence of a mildly challenging week. You find the European adapter, of course. It was exactly where you thought it should have been, in the side pocket of the larger suitcase, the one your spouse insisted on checking through, which you had initially mocked for its size. You pull it out now, holding the small plastic block between your thumb and forefinger. It seems absurdly small for the amount of marital discord it almost caused. You look at your partner, who is wrestling the massive, cumbersome brass key back into its designated velvet pouch, the key that unlocked room 3 and metaphorically unlocked the low-level annoyance between you. You both work efficiently, quietly. The damp jacket is rolled into a tight ball, a monument to poor consumer choices. The paperback novel, The Alpine Echo, is left face down on the bedside table, a silent promise to the next unsuspecting couple that they, too, will learn to hate brooding men in knitwear. The beige carpet, which you've grown intimately familiar with over the past few days, looks slightly less offensive now that you're leaving it behind. There is no emotional clinging, no wistful glance back at the view from the window, where the snow eventually turned to gray slush. It's an almost clinical departure. You are ready to trade the forced serenity of the mountains for the familiar chaos of home, where at least you know which electrical socket works. You check under the bed for any stray tissues or forgotten pain pills. Everything is accounted for except, perhaps, the sense of grand romance you started with. You even manage a weak, genuine smile when you realize you packed the wrong charging cable for the main camera, another small, boring imperfection to add to the ledger. You take one last look around the room, noticing how small the world suddenly seems now that you're not trapped in it. The proprietor is nowhere in sight when you descend the creaking stairs, so you simply leave the monstrous brass key on the front desk next to a small note that reads, "Thank you. We survived." It feels entirely appropriate. You walk out into the afternoon light, which is bright but lacks the aggressive intensity of Lugano, and head toward the waiting taxi, feeling lighter than you have all week. The journey home was a blur of trains, delayed flights, and the low-grade chaos of re-entry. You navigate airports with the quiet efficiency of two people who have already faced the existential dread of a broken zipper and a shed on a goat path. There is no longer any pressure to perform the role of glowing, newlywed travelers. Instead, you are just two passengers with mildly uncomfortable seating assignments and an ankle that still needs wrapping. This brings you to the return home and the quiet, strange aftermath of your forgotten honeymoon. You finally step back into your apartment, and the air immediately feels different. It's dry, familiar, and most importantly, you know exactly where the European travel adapter is supposed to plug in. There is a moment of deep, profound peace. You are not cold. You are not fighting for bandwidth. You don't have to worry about running into a retired Olympian discussing the price of cheese. The entire expensive, logistically complex Swiss trip fades with alarming speed, replaced by the comfort of your own mattress and the reliable volume of your own television. The only physical remnant of the Alps, the only piece of forced coziness that made it back with you, is the souvenir, the completely unnecessary, slightly oversized cuckoo clock you bought for your parents. You and your spouse carefully unpack it, hang it on the wall in the living room, and spend 30 minutes meticulously setting the time and adjusting the weights. You stand back admiring the carved little birds and the rustic alpine charm. It is undeniably a very Swiss clock. You wait. The moment for the first cuckoo arrives. You both hold your breath, expecting the cheerful melodic sound that signifies Swiss precision and whimsy. Instead, you hear a faint metallic clunk, followed by a strangled, hollow wheeze. The little wooden bird pokes its head out of the door, looks wildly around as if utterly confused about its surroundings, and then retreats, making a noise that sounds suspiciously like a cat coughing up a hairball. You wait for the next hour, and the whole sequence repeats. Clunk, wheeze, momentary appearance of the confused bird. The clock, you realize, never works right. It is perpetually off by 7 minutes. And the bird mechanism seems to suffer from a persistent, low-grade existential panic. You try to adjust the chains, the weights, and even consult a YouTube video on Swiss cuckoo clock troubleshooting, which buffers beautifully, proving the superiority of home internet. Nothing works. Eventually, you just leave it. It becomes a permanent, slightly dysfunctional fixture, a monument to the trip's beautiful imperfection. It doesn't keep time, but it serves as a silent, hilarious reminder that the most memorable part of your honeymoon was not the vista, but the shared experience of low-grade mechanical failure and bureaucratic confusion. You look at your spouse, who is now effortlessly making a hot cup of tea in a kettle that works, and you share a small, knowing smile. The adventure was a failure, but the marriage survived, largely because you spent more time laughing at the absurdity of it all than actually trying to force romance. The feeling of being home washes over you, warm and absolute. The alpine air, the cold stone of the chalet, the relentless rhythm of the wheels on the train, all of it slows, softens, and fades into the background hum of your own life. The light in the room dims, casting long, familiar shadows across the walls you know so well. You lean back into the familiar contours of your armchair. Take a long, slow breath, letting the muscle tension unwind from your shoulders, releasing the memory of the heavy brass key and the icy water. The faint, irritating wheeze from the cuckoo clock is the last sound to settle, becoming just another subtle, expected element in the comfortable silence.